The Hill Country Livestock Auction in Fredericksburg, Texas, had a reputation problem, and that problem had a name: Lot 47. For 3 consecutive monthly auctions, the same Angus bull had entered the sale ring, and for 3 consecutive months, he'd been returned to his owner unsold after displaying behavior that made even experienced cattle handlers nervous. "He's aggressive," the auctioneer warned, as 2 handlers cautiously led the bull into the ring on the first Saturday of October. "Unpredictable. Won't tolerate close approach. Owner reports he's been like this since weaning. No known injury or illness, just mean-tempered. Starting bid $800, and folks, I'll be honest, that's generous considering his disposition." The bull in question was physically impressive. 18 months old, approximately 1,400 pounds, with excellent conformation and the kind of muscular development that suggested superior genetics. His black coat was glossy, his frame well-proportioned, and his movement powerful and coordinated. By all physical measures, he should have been worth $2,500 or more as breeding stock. But the moment anyone approached within 10 feet, the bull's demeanor transformed. His head lowered, his body tensed, and he pawed the ground in a display that every cattleman recognized as prelude to a charge. The handlers kept maximum distance, using long sorting sticks to guide him rather than risking direct contact. Marcus Holloway sat in the bleachers watching this familiar scene play out for the 3rd time. At 62 years old, Marcus was a semi-retired insurance CEO who'd moved to Texas 5 years earlier, purchasing a modest 200-acre ranch as a weekend retreat that had gradually become his full-time residence after his wife passed. He ran a small cattle operation, 20 breeding cows, more for the therapeutic value of ranch work than for profit. Marcus had watched this bull at the previous 2 auctions, had seen the same aggressive behavior, had heard the same warnings. But something about the situation bothered him in a way he couldn't quite articulate. The bull's aggression seemed performative rather than genuine, a defense mechanism rather than inherent meanness. "No bids at $800, the auctioneer announced. "How about $600? Anyone willing to take a chance on this animal?" Silence. Ranchers weren't in the business of buying dangerous cattle, regardless of physical quality. A bull that couldn't be safely handled was a liability, not an asset. $400 then. "Folks, his genetics are solid, his health is excellent. Someone with experience handling difficult cattle could potentially—" "Nobody's that experienced," someone called from the bleachers, and scattered laughter followed. The bull was led back out, unsold again, and Marcus watched him go with the nagging feeling that everyone was missing something obvious. But what? He had no special expertise in animal behavior, no particular reason to believe he could succeed where 3 months of professional cattlemen had failed. That evening, Marcus sat on his ranch house porch with his 12-year-old grandson, David, who was visiting for the weekend. David had been profoundly deaf since birth, communicating fluently in American Sign Language, a language Marcus had learned over the past 12 years to ensure he could communicate fully with his grandson. "Grandpa, you look worried," David signed, his young face showing the perceptiveness that often came with heightened visual awareness. "There's a bull at the auction that nobody can handle," Marcus signed back. "He's aggressive, won't let anyone approach, but something feels wrong about it, like maybe everyone's misunderstanding what's actually happening." David's expression became thoughtful. "Maybe he's scared, not mean. Fear looks like aggression sometimes." The simple observation stopped Marcus cold. Fear looks like aggression. It was exactly the kind of insight that came from someone who'd spent his entire life navigating a world that often misunderstood him, who'd learned to read body language and intention because verbal communication wasn't available to him. "You might be right," Marcus signed slowly. "But how would you calm a scared bull that weighs 1,400 pounds and thinks everyone's a threat?" David smiled, the confident smile of a child who'd grown up finding creative solutions to communication barriers. "Same way you'd calm any scared creature. Show him you're not a threat. Be patient. Use body language he can understand." The next morning, Marcus called the bull's owner, a rancher named Tom Kellerman, who'd been trying unsuccessfully to sell the animal for 3 months. "Tom, it's Marcus Holloway. I want to come look at that Angus bull of yours, the one you've been trying to sell at auction." Tom's skepticism was audible. "Marcus, no offense, but that bull's dangerous. I've had him since he was 6 months old, tried every handling technique I know. He's just wired wrong. I'm probably going to send him to slaughter next week, rather than keep paying to haul him to auctions where nobody'll buy him. Give me one afternoon with him before you make that decision. If I can't make progress, you've lost nothing but a few hours. Your funeral, Tom said, but he agreed. Marcus picked up David from his daughter's house that afternoon, explaining his plan. We're going to visit a bull that everyone says is dangerous, but I think he might just be scared and misunderstood. I want you to observe him, watch how he moves, how he reacts. Tell me what you see that others might be missing. David's eyes lit up with the excitement of being trusted with something important. I can do that, Grandpa. At Tom Kellerman's ranch, the bull was kept in a reinforced pen away from other cattle. Tom met them at the fence, his expression carrying both curiosity and concern. That's him. Hasn't calmed down since I separated him from the herd. Gets worse every time someone tries to approach. Marcus and David stood at the fence, making no move toward the bull, simply observing. The animal stood in the far corner of the pen, his body language tense, his dark eyes fixed on them with what most people would interpret as hostility. But David, who'd spent 12 years reading body language as his primary form of understanding the world around him, saw something different. He watched the bull for 5 full minutes in silence, then began signing to his grandfather. Grandpa, he's not aggressive. He's terrified. Look at his ears. They keep rotating, trying to locate sounds he hears but can't identify. His head keeps turning like he's confused about where threats are coming from. And watch. When birds fly over, he startles violently. This isn't a mean bull. This is a deaf bull. Marcus stared at his grandson, then back at the bull, and suddenly everything about the animal's behavior made perfect sense. The apparent aggression when people approached, it was panic at humans suddenly appearing in his visual field without the warning sounds of footsteps that normal cattle would hear. The difficulty handling him. Handlers were using verbal commands and vocal cues that the bull literally couldn't perceive. The isolation from the herd. Deaf cattle often became anxious and defensive because they couldn't hear the communication sounds that kept herds coordinated and calm. Tom, Marcus said quietly, has anyone ever tested this bull's hearing? His hearing? No. Why would we? He's just mean-tempered. I don't think he's mean-tempered at all. I think he's deaf. And I think that changes everything. Tom Kellerman stared at Marcus as if he'd suggested the bull could fly. Deaf? Marcus, how would we even know? He responds to movement. He reacts when we come near. He reacts to visual stimuli, Marcus interrupted gently. But Tom, think about it. Has he ever responded to voice commands? Does he turn his head when you call? Does he react to sounds behind him when he can't see the source? Tom opened his mouth to argue, then stopped, his weathered face shifting from skepticism to uncertainty. I've always assumed he was just stubborn. Wouldn't come when called, wouldn't respond to voice pressure like normal cattle. I figured it was part of his attitude problem. David stepped forward, signing rapidly to Marcus, who translated aloud. David wants to test it. He suggests we make loud sounds when the bull isn't looking at us and observe whether he reacts. Tom pulled out his truck keys and, standing directly behind the bull where the animal couldn't see him, jangled them loudly. No reaction. He clapped his hands sharply, a sound that would normally make any cattle startle. The bull continued grazing, completely oblivious. Tom picked up a metal feed bucket and banged it with a stick, creating a noise that echoed across the ranch. The bull's ears didn't even twitch. My God, Tom said quietly. How did I not notice this? I've had him for a year. Because you were interpreting his behavior through the lens of what you expected, Marcus said. You expected a difficult bull, so every behavior confirmed that expectation. But David sees the world differently. He recognized the signs of deafness because he lives with it himself. David was already moving slowly along the fence line, staying in the bull's line of sight, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. The bull watched him warily, but didn't display the aggressive posturing that typically occurred when adults approached. David stopped about 15 feet from the animal and simply stood still, making himself a non-threatening presence. Then slowly and deliberately, David began using simple signs, not ASL exactly, but clear, exaggerated gestures. He held his palm out flat. Stop, No threat. He pointed to his own chest, then made a calm downward motion with both hands. I am safe, you are safe. He took one small step forward, paused, repeated the calming gesture. The bull's entire demeanor shifted. His head lifted, his ears oriented forward, his body language transforming from defensive tension to cautious curiosity. David took another small step, maintained eye contact, repeated the calming hand signals. What's he doing? Tom whispered, afraid to break whatever was happening. He's communicating in the bull's language, Marcus replied softly. Visual signals, body language, patience, everything the bull can actually perceive. Over the next 20 minutes, David slowly closed the distance, never moving when the bull showed signs of stress, always maintaining clear, visible, non-threatening body language. By the time he reached the fence directly in front of the animal, the bull was calm, watching David with what looked remarkably like relief, as if someone had finally spoken a language he understood. David reached his hand slowly through the fence rails. The bull, who'd been labeled aggressive and dangerous for a year, cautiously stretched his neck forward and allowed the 12-year-old boy to touch his nose. Tom Kellerman's voice cracked with emotion. I was going to send him to slaughter next week. I thought he was defective, dangerous. But he's just deaf. Just trying to survive in a world he can't fully perceive. Marcus put a hand on Tom's shoulder. You couldn't have known without someone who understood what deafness looks like. This isn't your fault. What do I do now? Tom asked. I can't keep a bull I can't handle normally. Even knowing he's deaf, I don't have the skills to work with him safely. Marcus looked at his grandson, who was still calmly interacting with the bull through the fence, and made a decision that surprised him even as he voiced it. I'll buy him. $1,200. What you would have gotten at auction if his hearing was normal. David and I will work with him, figure out how to handle him using visual communication. Marcus, you don't have to. I want to. David just showed me that this bull isn't broken or dangerous. He's just misunderstood. And if a 12-year-old deaf boy can communicate with him in 20 minutes, I'm betting we can develop a full handling system based on visual cues. The sale was completed that afternoon. Tom helped transport the bull to Marcus's ranch, where they settled him in a reinforced pen with clear sight lines and plenty of space. As Tom drove away, Marcus and David stood at the fence, watching the bull explore his new surroundings. We need to name him, Marcus signed to David. David thought for a moment, then signed back with a slight smile. Quiet. Because he lives in quiet like me, and because he's actually peaceful when people understand how to approach him. Quiet it is, Marcus agreed. Over the next week, Marcus and David developed a systematic approach to handling quiet. They created a vocabulary of hand signals, approximately 20 distinct gestures for different commands and communications. Come, stop, safe, danger, food, water. Each signal was large, clear, and consistently used. They discovered that quiet responded beautifully to visual communication. Without the confusion of sounds he couldn't hear, with clear hand signals he could see and interpret, the aggressive bull became cooperative and even gentle. David spent hours each day working with quiet, teaching him to follow hand signals, to trust human presence, to understand that visual communication could replace the auditory cues he'd never received. Marcus documented everything, taking detailed notes on which signals worked best, how quiet responded to different approaches, what triggered stress versus calm. He contacted Dr. Rebecca Lattimore, a veterinary behaviorist at Texas A&M University, who specialized in sensory impairments in livestock. Dr. Lattimore visited the ranch 2 weeks after Quiet's arrival, bringing testing equipment to formally confirm the deafness and assess its severity. After comprehensive examination, her diagnosis was definitive. Quiet had profound bilateral hearing loss, likely congenital, with no response to sound at any frequency. This is actually remarkable, Dr. Lattimore told Marcus and David as they stood at Quiet's pen, where the bull was calmly eating hay, occasionally glancing up to check for hand signals from David. Congenital deafness in cattle is rare but not unheard of, maybe one in several thousand animals. But most deaf cattle get culled early because handlers interpret their confusion and defensive behavior as aggression. You two have essentially created a functional communication system for a deaf bull using adapted sign language. David created it, Marcus corrected. I just followed his lead. The implications are significant, Dr. Lattimore continued. There are probably hundreds or thousands of cattle being labeled as dangerous or unmanageable when they're actually dealing with hearing loss or other sensory impairments. Your work here could change how the industry approaches these animals. She pulled out her phone and took video of David working with Quiet, capturing the clear communication between deaf boy and deaf bull. Would you consider writing this up as a case study? Letting me share this with veterinary and agricultural communities? Marcus looked at David, who signed enthusiastically. Yes. Other deaf bulls shouldn't be called mean when they're just scared. That evening, as Marcus and David sat on the porch watching sunset paint the Texas sky in shades of orange and gold, Quiet stood peacefully in his pen, no longer the aggressive bull nobody wanted, but simply an animal who'd finally found someone who spoke his language. You saved his life, Marcus signed to his grandson. David shook his head and signed back. He saved himself. He just needed someone to listen, really listen, to what he was trying to say. 3 months after Quiet arrived at Marcus's ranch, the transformation was extraordinary. The bull who'd been deemed too dangerous to sell now responded to over 30 distinct hand signals with reliability that impressed even experienced cattle handlers. David visited every weekend, continuing to refine their communication system and spending hours working with Quiet in the pasture. Word spread quickly through the Texas ranching community. Marcus received calls from curious neighbors, skeptical cattlemen, and even a reporter from the Austin newspaper who'd heard about the deaf bull and the deaf boy. Most visitors arrived expecting to see some kind of circus trick, but what they witnessed was something far more profound: genuine communication between species based on mutual understanding and patience. Tom Kellerman visited one Saturday morning, standing at the fence as David calmly led Quiet through a series of commands using only hand signals. The bull followed perfectly, stopping, turning, approaching, backing up, all without a single verbal cue. I wouldn't believe it if I wasn't seeing it, Tom said, his voice thick with emotion. Marcus, I almost killed that bull because I thought he was broken, but he was just speaking a different language. We all were, Marcus replied. We were trying to communicate in a way he couldn't receive. David taught us to meet Quiet where he was, rather than forcing him to adapt to our limitations. Dr. Lattimore's case study was published in the Journal of Veterinary Behavior in December, complete with video documentation of David and Quiet's interactions. The response from the agricultural community was immediate and divided. Progressive ranchers and veterinarians recognized the implications for animal welfare and handling techniques. Traditional cattlemen dismissed it as impractical sentimentality that had no place in commercial operations. But the story resonated beyond agriculture. Deaf advocacy organizations shared it widely, celebrating David's insight and the validation that communication barriers could be bridged with understanding and adaptation. Marcus received emails from parents of deaf children thanking him for highlighting their kids' unique perspectives and problem-solving abilities. In February, Marcus got an unexpected call from a rancher in Oklahoma named Vincent Torres. Mr. Holloway, I saw the article about your bull. I think I might have a similar situation. I've got a heifer, about 14 months old, that I was planning to cull because she's untrainable. After reading about Quiet, I'm wondering if she might be deaf too. Would you and your grandson be willing to come evaluate her? Marcus discussed it with David, who was enthusiastic about helping. If there are more deaf cattle being called aggressive, we should help them, Grandpa. They drove to Torres's ranch the following weekend. The heifer in question displayed identical behaviors to Quiet's early patterns: defensive posturing, apparent aggression when approached, failure to respond to vocal commands. David performed the same sound tests, confirmed the deafness, and within an hour had established basic communication with the animal using hand signals. She's not aggressive, David signed to Vincent through Marcus's translation. She's just scared and confused. Give me 3 weeks visiting on weekends and I can teach her the same signal system we use with Quiet. Vincent agreed immediately. Over the next month, David made the drive to Oklahoma every Saturday, working patiently with the heifer he named Whisper. By March, Whisper was as responsive to visual commands as Quiet, and Vincent Torres became an advocate for sensory impairment awareness in livestock management. "You've given me a breeding animal I thought was worthless," Vincent told Marcus. "But more than that, you've changed how I look at cattle behavior. How many animals have I culled over the years because I misinterpreted fear or confusion as meanness?" The question haunted Marcus too. How many deaf cattle had been slaughtered because no one recognized their disability? How many other sensory impairments were being labeled as behavioral problems? In April, Dr. Lattimore invited Marcus and David to present their work at the Southwest Veterinary Conference in San Antonio. Standing before 300 veterinarians and animal scientists, 12-year-old David, with Marcus translating his signs, explained how recognizing Quiet's deafness had saved the bull's life and created a replicable communication system. The presentation received a standing ovation. Afterward, 17 ranchers approached Marcus with stories of problem cattle they now suspected might have hearing impairments. By summer, Marcus and David had evaluated 11 cattle across Texas and Oklahoma, confirming deafness in 9 of them, and successfully implementing visual communication systems for each. What had started as one grandfather's impulse purchase of an unwanted bull had evolved into a small movement challenging how the agricultural industry understood and accommodated animal disabilities. Quiet himself remained peacefully at Marcus's ranch, now fully integrated with the main herd, his calm demeanor influencing the other cattle positively. Visitors often commented that he seemed like the gentlest bull they'd ever encountered, a stark contrast to the aggressive reputation that had nearly cost him his life. "He was never the problem," David signed to his grandfather one evening, as they watched Quiet graze in the golden sunset light. "The problem was everyone trying to talk to him in a language he couldn't hear. Once we learned his language, everything changed." Marcus nodded, understanding that the lesson extended far beyond cattle. In a world that often expected everyone to communicate the same way, David and Quiet had proven that adaptation, patience, and willingness to meet others where they were could bridge seemingly impossible gaps. The aggressive bull nobody wanted had become a teacher, showing that what appears as hostility is often just fear seeking understanding. And a deaf boy had given voice, through his hands, to animals who'd been silenced by misunderstanding. 14 months after Marcus bought Quiet, the Texas Cattlemen's Association announced their annual Humanitarian Award recipient, a recognition given to individuals who'd made significant contributions to animal welfare and agricultural innovation. Marcus received the notification via phone call from the association's president, cattle rancher Elizabeth Harmon. "Mr. Holloway, the board voted unanimously. Your work with deaf cattle has changed conversations across the industry. We'd like to honor you and David at our annual conference in Houston this September." Marcus was stunned. "Elizabeth, I appreciate this, but David deserves the recognition. He's the one who identified Quiet's deafness and created the communication system." "Which is exactly why we're honoring both of you," Elizabeth replied firmly. 12 years old and already changing how we think about livestock management. That boy's remarkable. The award ceremony took place on a Saturday evening before 800 ranchers, veterinarians, and agricultural professionals. David, wearing his first suit and looking simultaneously proud and nervous, stood beside his grandfather on stage as Elizabeth Harmon presented matching plaques. "Marcus and David Holloway didn't just save one bull," Elizabeth told the audience. "They challenged an entire industry to reconsider how we interpret animal behavior. Because of their work, we now know that sensory impairments in livestock are more common than previously recognized, and that what we've been calling aggression or poor temperament may actually be fear and confusion stemming from disabilities we failed to identify." She paused, her voice taking on deeper emotion. 3 weeks ago, my own ranch identified a deaf calf using the protocols these two developed. An animal we would have culled is now thriving because someone taught us to look beyond surface behavior. That's the impact of real innovation. The standing ovation lasted nearly 2 minutes. Afterward, dozens of ranchers approached Marcus and David, sharing stories of problem cattle they were now reevaluating, asking for guidance on implementing visual communication systems, thanking them for changing perspectives that had been entrenched for generations. Tom Kellerman, who'd driven from Fredericksburg for the ceremony, embraced Marcus with tears in his eyes. "I almost killed him. I almost sent Quiet to slaughter because I didn't understand. You gave him a chance I wouldn't have." "You gave us the opportunity," Marcus corrected. and you had the humility to admit you'd been wrong. That takes courage. The media coverage from the award brought unexpected attention. A documentary filmmaker from PBS contacted Marcus about creating a short film on Quiet's story. A children's book author wanted to write David's story for young readers. Agricultural universities requested permission to use their communication protocols and veterinary curricula. But the moment that mattered most to David came 2 weeks after the ceremony, when a letter arrived from the Texas School for the Deaf in Austin. A teacher had shown her students the video of David working with Quiet, and the entire class had written letters expressing how inspired they felt, seeing someone like them achieve something remarkable. One letter, from a 10-year-old girl named Sophia, particularly moved David. "I always thought being deaf meant I couldn't do important things, but you showed that being deaf helped you see what hearing people missed. You saved Quiet because you understood him. Thank you for showing me that being different isn't being less." David showed the letter to his grandfather, signing with tears in his eyes. "I just wanted to help a scared bull. I didn't know it would mean this much to other people." "That's how the best changes happen," Marcus signed back. "You saw a problem, applied your unique perspective, and solved it with compassion. Everything else followed from that simple act of understanding." That evening, as they sat on the porch with Quiet grazing peacefully in the pasture below, Marcus reflected on how one $200 purchase of an aggressive bull had transformed his retirement, his relationship with his grandson, and inadvertently sparked a movement toward greater awareness of animal welfare in agriculture. Nobody had wanted to buy the aggressive bull until a deaf boy recognized that aggression was just fear-seeking translation. And in learning Quiet's language, they taught an entire industry to listen differently. 2 years after Marcus bought Quiet at the Fredericksburg auction, the bull stood peacefully in the pasture, now 3.5 years old and fully mature at 1,800 pounds. He'd sired 6 calves, all hearing, all bearing his exceptional genetics and calm temperament. The aggressive bull nobody wanted had become the foundation of Marcus's small breeding program. David, now 14, had trained 12 ranchers across 3 states in visual communication techniques for deaf cattle. His protocols had been adopted by Texas A&M's veterinary program and were being taught in agricultural science courses. What had started as one boy's compassionate observation had become standard practice for progressive cattle operations throughout the Southwest. Dr. Lattimore published a follow-up study documenting 23 confirmed cases of congenital deafness in cattle identified using David and Marcus's assessment methods. The research estimated that approximately 1 in 2,000 cattle might have significant hearing impairment, meaning thousands of animals were potentially being mislabeled as dangerous when they were simply deaf. On a warm October afternoon, Marcus and David stood at Quiet's pasture fence, watching him interact calmly with the herd. A young rancher from New Mexico was visiting to learn the visual communication system before implementing it with her own suspected deaf heifer. "How did you know?" she asked David. "How did you see what everyone else missed?" David signed his response, which Marcus translated. "I didn't see anything special. I just recognized myself." Quiet was living in a world where everyone was speaking a language he couldn't understand, and everyone thought his confusion meant he was broken. But he wasn't broken. He just needed someone to meet him where he was. The rancher nodded, understanding. "You gave him a voice." "No," David signed with a gentle smile. "He always had a voice. We just finally learned to listen." As the sun set over the Texas hills, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Quiet raised his massive head and looked directly at David. The boy who'd saved his life by recognizing the difference wasn't deficiency, that communication barriers could be bridges when approached with patience and understanding. The bull nobody wanted had become a teacher, proving that what society labels as aggressive or broken often just needs translation. And a 12-year-old deaf boy had shown an entire industry that the most profound solutions sometimes come from those who see the world differently. Marcus put his arm around his grandson's shoulders, feeling profound gratitude for the impulse purchase that had changed everything. One unwanted bull, one observant child, one moment of recognition that transformed fear into understanding. Quiet returned to grazing, peaceful and content, his legacy extending far beyond the pasture where he stood, a living testament to the power of compassion, the importance of perspective, and the beautiful truth that sometimes the answers we seek come from the voices we've forgotten to hear. In barns and pastures across Texas and beyond, other deaf cattle were being identified, understood, and given the chance Quiet had received. All because one boy had refused to accept that aggression was the answer when empathy asked better questions. The aggressive bull had found his voice, and in doing so, had given voice to countless others who'd been waiting, silently, for someone to finally understand their language.